We just landed on the moon in a Lambo. Taking pictures with the zoom and the...
My name is Christopher. I'm 39 years old, father of two. Come from Germany. Saw the crypto development emerge about 2013 when hardly anybody was talking about things like blockchain, decentralization and stuff. Some very smart brains at universities started to wrap their heads around this idea. And we early on pitched it with some of our clients, the smartest ones. And they initially got caught by the fascination that this idea of a total decentralization, the flip of the entire system, brings on the table. It was too early back then, but today we hardly see a day without a request from someone to explain, to translate, to conceptualize and realize strategies that either create a new business model using decentralized platforms, systems, or save an existing business model by making use of the technology. And I think we are in a very interesting moment regarding this whole development, because obviously there's a hype, a global hype. There's hardly any conference that goes without blockchain now on stage. But once you scratch like the surface of many of the pitches, many of the presentations, I think you eventually see that 80%, maybe more, is just marketing. So it's what I call like more greenwashing. It's the attempt to just board that train and make use of it to increase the value of existing systems. There's an iced tea company that just put blockchain into their name, and I think the shares went up like 20%, at least a significant increase. And this strongly reminds me of what happened like 20 years ago with the dot-com bubble. Though compared to numbers, the blockchain bubble still is very small. So there's lots of space to grow into, but quite obviously, in my personal opinion, I'd rather like to see the bubble burst as soon as possible. So the core assets, the real teams and the real technology, good solutions, can unfold and draw the attention that is there now to get their stuff to a next level. Honestly, it's all about societal change. In contrast to many of the teams that go for easy money or quick money and that find themselves rather quicker than later in serious trouble, as I hear it from many teams in the US right now, facing heavy challenges by the SEC, for instance. And I'm talking about the big ICOs of 2017 that almost completely have to put all their attention now into like solving these challenges with the regulatory institutions, then into developing their solutions, because they were looking at the money, they were looking at the fundraising. What fascinated me initially was the idea to give leverage to everyday people, to people from places in the world where banking still doesn't exist. But people own a smartphone, they are connected, and maybe with a single dollar, they can now get access to a completely new financial system, a global system that is on 24/7, that doesn't know opening hours like banks and banks branches, that doesn't have entry barriers like the New York Stock Exchange or the Frankfurt Stock Exchange, for instance, but is a system where in a very short-term future, in my opinion, every asset, and I literally mean every asset, it could be your car, it could be your watch, it could be shares, could be traded against every other asset. So I think we can literally imagine someone buying a coffee by exchanging shares for that coffee on a micro level, so a tiny chunk of shares of whatever company, doesn't have to be NYSE listed. This is something that really thrills me and quite obviously lets us question everything that we grew up with, that we learned at school, at university, during our jobs, our professional careers, because the institutions that are in place right now weren't made for this. They were made for central control. They were made to represent certain ideas and rules, some of them democratically elected, most of them not. Some of them in public ownership, most of them not. So looking at this leverage that this decentral philosophy brings into the game, this is what fascinated me most from the first moment on that I learned about it. As I consider myself being a responsible optimist, let me start with positive ideas. As I see it, this movement, it speaks to many brains. It doesn't really matter what generation someone belongs to. It can be X, Y, Z, but can also be my granddad. One of our recent investors into an accelerator that we built in the Principality of Liechtenstein, he's a retired manager and he's now 68. I can see his eyes glow when he talks about like Holochain, which is a team that we boarded on last year, decided to go for an ethical ICO, which is another component that I am very interested in. So they, instead of going for an initial coin offering, decided to use a different language. They said we go for an initial community offering. They capped the budget, the fundraising budget that they were aiming at 20 million. And that's exactly where they stopped. They could have gone for much more, but they didn't. What drives these guys is the idea to hand the power to as many people as possible across the world, give them the proper tools to develop now a new Twitter, a new Facebook, a new Google Drive that is completely decentralized and runs on Holochain at much lower cost than, for instance, Bitcoin, of course, but also Ether / Ethereum and smart contracts. It's truly a fraction of the cost for a transaction that you have to come up with on Holo. And thereby it practically, not just theoretically, becomes accessible to everyone. It becomes accessible to a farmer in Nigeria as well as to a blue-collar worker in, let's say, Argentina, as well as to a high-frequency trader in London. Everybody is on the same eye level. So that is, I think, a very, very positive aspect. And of course, the seriousness of this movement, the volume that is being traded, and it's increasing on a daily basis, it puts also serious pressure on the existing structures and institutions. So, for instance, the federal German bank neglected, ignored pretty much the blockchain and especially cryptocurrencies movement until recently. Now they can't anymore because there are simply too many assets already shifted. And I think that is something that was necessary for at least the last 20 years and never happened because the comfort zone was just too spacious, it was too big. And it becomes less comfortable now, and I think that is another positive aspect. Negative aspect, and a very serious one, is that hardly anybody asks the question for the ethical ground rules, base rules, that teams put into their code. What are the ideas? What are the assumptions about community that these anonymous groups of developers that we don't know anything about, but their code, have implemented there? Do they tell us or don't they tell us? And once these things get in play and are being picked up, you can see people speculating in massive volumes. And once that happens, I think it's too late to talk about ethics. That has to happen before, and I think maybe it would be a good idea to come up with an oath, maybe something like that, for this decentralized global community, so we make sure that it's for the better of everybody involved, and not just more of the same. So a tiny fraction of the global population benefiting from ever more technology. I just recently, a week ago, visited huge mining farms in Europe, in the south of Europe, where you can see, again, like power amassed in old abandoned factory buildings, non-regulated, and run by people with at least like questionable intentions. Once you approach them and you get them into a conversation about what drives them, you can learn, and you can eventually learn that they are of very positive intentions, but that is definitely a negative aspect that needs to be taken care of. And I'm not even talking about things being put into systems run by AI, for instance, that eventually and very quickly will move out of our control space. A conversation that others are maybe more qualified to take care of than myself. I'm talking about like guys like Elon Musk and his OpenAI foundation. But yeah, I think access means power, and power means responsibility, and there is no way out of this. So everybody should stand up for this as well. I think it's a next level culture in blockchain developments that had to take place. Yeah. And these guys, a very international team, people from all over the world, Australia, the United States, Europe. It didn't take them too long to actually find that solution. And once you look into that case, you see that the word is spreading so much faster than with many other more like conventional blockchain cases, because people of that mindset that are thinking about long-term future developments, they just feel that urge for a new, let's say, code of conduct that can also be decentralized. It doesn't have to have a new like central institution that sets the rules for everybody. It can be 100,000 people around the planet, but it has to be done. And I think with examples like Wikipedia, we can see that it's doable. Yeah. So why not do it in the blockchain space? Well, for once, I can only repeat again that I think it's important to question oneself and your team. What ethical rules do we want to apply to our solution, to our business? It doesn't really matter what it is about. Is it a currency? Is it a token? Is it some other infrastructural part of the ecosystem? What rules do you want to play by? And it's not a very philosophical debate. It's very practical. What bank do you set your account up with? What do you ask from your investors, even if they pay only $10 into whatever account? Do you allow for everything, or do you set limits? Do you cap certain developments? Because you've got an idea of what you want to achieve with the money you raise, for instance. Be transparent. Share not only your great vision with a white paper, but also what happens in the backyard. Who's on your team for real? What are these people's qualifications? What are their beliefs? Are they committed to your case in a serious way? And lastly, and for me, utmost importantly, talk to your neighbor, the baker or the cab driver, your grandma, your local political representative. Because if this stays in, again, another elite, it's again more of the same. It won't achieve the societal change that so many of that community at least claim to strive for. only once this really becomes a mass movement, only when this really can go mainstream and my grandma understands what it is about, I think it can really change the way we run the planet. And that, at the end of the day, is what it, to me, seems to be about. Because the entire system that we still work with is doomed. There is no plan B, but there is a new idea how to run it. So what keeps me up at night is the idea to combine, for instance, ideas of decentralization on the blockchain with the circular economy idea. Mm-hmm. And I'm still waiting for someone to explain me how that will work out.
We just landed on the moon in a Lambo, taking pictures with the zoom and the angle. We'll be coming back to you with the samples. Our predictions coming soon with a